operations is also about how you manage institutional knowledge. So, who gets to be trusted to know what they know? Whose word do we trust? How do we trust that word? Hi, dreamers. Welcome back to the Dreaming Forward podcast. This month, we're going to be talking about people, culture, and inclusion. And again, that's a phrase that I coined to describe the intersection of HR, organizational development, or OD work, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. So today's conversation is about one of my favorite topics, which is organizational development. I love OD work. It is one of the best aspects of my work. I don't always get to do it, mainly because people don't always know what it is. And so sometimes I'm doing OD work and they don't know it. I got to slide it in like your mama do your vegetables when you're a little kid. Because I see the value of the work. But I've had a chance to have some really great OD projects over the years with my clients, and it's always a great time. I always get a chance to see monumental shifts in workplace culture and organizational effectiveness. And like I said, I love it. It's like my jam. With that being said, I want to define what is organizational development and tell you about the 4 shifts that it accomplishes in a company. So, if you want to know more about it, because of course I'm going to give you an overview, but you can learn more about it in my book, Evolution to Equity, which is available on Amazon. And there is a link in the description. I also pin it to the comments for you to go and purchase a copy. Now, of course, organizational development is its own discipline. Organizational development can be accomplished through a number of job titles, but it is one of the premier expressions of the work of organizational psychologists, of which I am one. I probably have been one for several years. That distinction, though, is what I think creates a level of detachment between the work and the people who are the objects of the work, employees and leaders. And so, because people feel like there's such a gap between who gets to practice OD and who is impacted by it, folks feel like it's not approachable. And then sometimes people just have never heard of it as a discipline. But my goal is to make OD approachable. My goal is to make OD touchable, palpable, and most of all, enjoyable for you. So let's get into defining what OD is. And I'm going to pull it straight from the book. So OD is a set of planned activities intended to shift a company in one or more of 4 areas. And I name those areas as structure, operations, employee capacity, or strategy. So again, organizational development, or OD for short, is a set of interventions or activities that you do on purpose to shift a company. Now, I frame up OD as the work of culture in people, culture, and inclusion. Because when you are implementing OD interventions, it is almost impossible for organizational culture to stay the same. And why that's important is because you want to anticipate those cultural shifts. And you also want to be the architect of them. So one of the worst outcomes I've seen from OD is when people are just doing things to do it and they don't pay any attention to the second, third, and fourth degree consequences of those actions, of those interventions, of those projects. This happens a whole lot when consultants come on board. I got to drag consultants, of which I am one. I have been on the receiving end of poor consultant behavior. I have been on the receiving end of consultant incompetence. I have been on the receiving end of lack of decorum from consultants. There's a person who comes to mind, and this young lady was considered just a superstar in this company because she had come from Big Four consulting background and she was working on this process mapping project. So she ended up getting some big job someplace else. And I'll never forget when she and I were working together, because first we had to work together on the project at a point. And I was like, hey, I wanted to look over the part that you're turning in and make sure it's merged with my part, because I know you gave me feedback on mine. And I just remember she was so disgusted that I would ever think that I could give her feedback on her work. And she just had this overall aura of, you can't touch me. You can't give me feedback. And I remember when she left, I was intimidated at first because I was like, oh my God, I know people just loved her work. She was so well respected within our HR team. And there's no way that I could capitalize on the success of this project that she's done up to this point. Man, when I got in them first team meetings with the team who was the object of the work. So again, it was process mapping outside of our department to get alignment for something that was happening in HR. And they were like, I was like, I know you all loved working with so and so, and I just want to be able to continue this. And they were like, no, we don't know what she was doing. Yo, they was like, we don't know what she was doing. We don't know where any of these documents are. We don't understand any of this. Like, we don't know what's going on. Can you help us? And this is something they had been working on with her for like 4 or 5 months. And I remember how it was described to me by the person who was handing it off to me, like, she's done this and it's so great. And I remember having to go back to them because, of course, they asked, like, well, how did it go? Because there was so much distrust of me. Like, oh, I don't know if Kalyn's going to be able to do it. And I had to tell them, I was like, they don't like any of her work. And they thought I was lying at first. They thought I was making it up. Because, again, how could I, as a little peon, ever say anything to this? And then they had to tell her, like, no, we don't know what that person was doing. Like, we already are seeing more clarity from one meeting with Kalyn than we did in the 6 months of this person working on this. Like, we don't know what was going on before. And I remember I created a whole new framework, process, using new technology, new systems, new collaborations to get that project on track to the point that other departments ended up coming on like, oh yes, we need this too, but we didn't want to touch it before. Can we work with Kalyn? And that was such an aha moment for me. Not just because it was a nice little ego boost, because I was getting thrashed at that job. Oh, it was to this day, it was by far one of the worst work experiences I've ever had. But it was also a validation of the fact that where you've worked does not indicate your level of competence in how you work. I've had the pleasure of working with some of the most prestigious companies in the world, but that don't mean I know how to do my job. And so what I want to share with you about understanding OD is that, number one, anybody can accomplish OD work. Yes, there is a center of excellence and a level of expertise if you are an organizational psychologist or if you have been formally trained in OD. Don't want to take away from that because that would be taken away from my own competence. But anybody can be accomplished in OD. Anybody can be effective in OD work because OD is understanding models and methodologies, history. It's also understanding how to build relationships to get to a goal. And if you can do those things, you can make this thing work. You can absolutely make this thing work. So let's talk about the 4 shifts, first of all. So strategy shift. Strategy shifts in OD is essentially understanding how the company is going to approach its work. So what types of products or services will we offer? What types of verticals and departments will we create? How are we going to approach getting to the market and staying in the market or exiting the market? Because sometimes that's a part of OD work. The employee capacity shift is understanding how do we get employees ready and keep them ready to do what we need them to do so that our strategy is successful. So that means, do we need to have a company-wide training? Do we need more managers? Do we need fewer managers? Do we need another position added in that can be project managers or do oversight? It's building out that capacity. You could think of this as getting a larger vessel. So let's say for the first 3 years of a company, you only needed people to be 8-ounce cups. But now for this next level, maybe you got a new round of funding or you added a new product or you've entered a new market in the world, a new geographic region. Now, instead of people being 8-ounce cups, you need them to be 32-ounce jars. How do you get them from 8 ounces to 32 ounces safely, cohesively, and in a timely manner so that you can meet those goals? You also want to think about operation shifts. This is really important because workflows change the more people you add. So I'm seeing this even in my own company. When it's just me, as long as it's in my brain, I can hurry up and do stuff. And there's no method to the madness sometimes. Sometimes it's like a mad scientist running around doing stuff, but it's just in my brain. It's me. When I have staff members, no, you have to write down processes. Sometimes people tell you that the process isn't working, and are you open to that feedback? Sometimes the workflow has bottlenecks that are stopping progress, and you didn't notice it until you added another team member or until one team member went away. Operations is also about how you manage institutional knowledge. So, who gets to be trusted to know what they know? Whose word do we trust? How do we trust that word? And then finally, when we think about structural shifts, this is the actual building of the company, the hierarchies, the reporting structures. So all four of those shifts require some level of OD intervention. In the book, I talk about a number of interventions. It's actually a table. I'm going to try to go to that page real quick. It's a little table that I put in to show you some common methodologies in OD, and you can use that to do some further research. But I can't stress enough that OD is accessible to everyone because OD impacts culture. So there are two main shifts that I believe OD impacts that I want to bring up today, and that is in segmenting work and communication. So I want to start with the segmenting work piece. One of my favorite actually OD projects to work on is job analysis. So that tends to fall in the HR function of compensation and benefits, but the job analysis is where you are creating a particular role's task groupings and the job tasks, looking at the time split. You are deciding who will do what on a team, who gets to supervise or manage the work, who is responsible for the operationalization of the work, etc. And that's important because, especially for smaller companies that grow over time, we play favorites. So we find our favorite employee, we find our favorite person and say, okay, hey, you go take this project because I trust you to do it. And when there is no rhyme or reason for why we split that up, the more people that come in, the more confusion that causes. So if you think about it again, if you started with 10 people, but there were a total of 40 tasks that needed to be done, and now the company has grown to the point that there are 100 tasks that need to be done, and now you got 60 people, there is a methodology for how you split that work up. And the systems that you create to segment and split that work will have a huge impact on everything from employee satisfaction to legal vulnerability, because you open yourself up to lawsuits when you can't explain why work is set up in a certain way, to even manager productivity. A lot of what we see in leader burnout is because the way tasks and projects are split on a team, it doesn't really give the department leaders the space to intelligently manage it. So let's think about cooking. Y'all know I love to cook. So if let's say I'm making dinner, right? I have to make whatever my protein is. I make whatever my starch is. That's one side. I might make whatever my vegetable is. And then let's say I want a bread, and then I want a dessert and a drink. So those are six distinct, yes, 3 and 3. So that's 6 distinct things that I need to be working on. If I'm cooking by myself, I might make dessert first and then switch over to bread and then do it, right? The minute you add a second person onto it, I can't tell them as this singular worker, well, I don't know, just pick something to do. I also can't just say, well, I like making bread and dessert, so you do everything else with no consideration to their expertise, to their interest, to their um, available time, right? All of that factors into the overall effectiveness of the product, which is this meal. And work is the exact same way. If we are adding people onto the team, if somebody is going out on leave, if there is somebody who is exiting the company to go for a promotion somewhere else, or exiting the team to go for a promotion in another department, if we aren't clear on that work split, it is going to cause chaos. And it is the leader's responsibility to understand not just the projects that are the most high profile, but the split of all the work that a team does. I can't tell you how many CEOs, how many department leaders I've talked to, and when I ask them, what do certain people do on their team they don't know? And then when I go deeper and say, well, just tell me about the work that happens on your team, period. They have no clue. But when I go ask such and such, quote unquote, low level employee, they're like, oh, yeah, so and so does that. This happens. Then we do this and we have to turn this in. They can run it all down. And that is an indictment on the leadership tone that is set at the highest levels in a company. As a CEO, as a C-suite leader, as a department leader, as an executive, as a people manager, you should know every single project that is happening on your team, all of them. You won't always have to touch it day to day because number one, that's a distraction. And number two, you got your own job to do. But you should know what's happening. It should be written down somewhere. That way, when people leave, or if you're assessing effectiveness, if you're thinking about how to split things up, you can see where to move stuff around. The next area I want to discuss is communication. OD is so tightly wound up with communication norms in the company, and people don't think about that. They never see that aspect of it. I'm going to give you an example of how I've seen this show up in a company, a few companies actually. So I have a survey product called the Equitable Culture and Design Assessment. And this survey, it asks a number of questions and is really designed just to understand the employee experience. Like, what is it like to work at your company? When I give this assessment to people, folks are always shocked at a number of the questions, but one of the survey items in particular that shocks people, the item says, I find out most of my office news through gossip. And it's one of those things that people probably haven't thought about up to this point, but when they hear the item and then they have to answer the item, it throws them off every time. And I've had some clients where they scored very low on that one, meaning people were saying, yeah, most of the news that happens at work, I do find it out through gossip. When the communication norms are set such that there is so much of a bottleneck to get important news, or that is way too open and everybody knows everything, which is also dangerous and not advisable, people don't know how to handle that because they can't anticipate their next moves. So I'll give you an example. Let's say there is a layoff coming. If you have norms in the company where it's all gossip and everybody talks about everything all the time, and as soon as something hits, you just put out an announcement and tell everybody, that could create more chaos than you intend, because now everybody's wondering, well, am I about to get laid off? Is it me? Is it you? Conversely, we've seen in the news many times over the past 2 years where people are just waking up to not being able to log into their email, or waking up, testing their email almost like they're playing a video game, and shocked to find that they still have a job. Both of those extremes in communication do not bode well for the people who remain, and it definitely does not reflect well on the employer brand. There is a balance to be had in the way we communicate, and the way we manage the 4 shifts of OD is how we make that process and that experience better. Some things everybody shouldn't know. Everybody shouldn't know why a particular leader got fired. I know that's probably going to get some pushback, but that's not everybody's business. But everybody should know and understand what are the business's top goals for the next 36 months. If it's a secret, how will people know how to do their work? Everybody should know why a person went on medical leave. But I absolutely should know if we are changing offices to a location that's 200 miles away and I might have to uproot my family. So when you think about communication, it's not just what you're communicating, it's the timeline that you communicate it. It is the quality of the communication. It's choosing whether or not it is a verbal conversation or it's written, and what's the sequence of that. So if you send me something in writing and then come talk to me about it, I've already interpreted what you said in the tone that I heard in my head. So some things you need to talk about first and then write it down and just send it as a follow-up. And then other things you want to put it in writing first and then have a conversation. Is it a group conversation or a one-on-one? All of that is influenced by what we do in organizational development. So with that being said, tell me in the comments, what has been your experience with OD? Have you ever known that there was an organizational development intervention happening? And if so, did you enjoy it? Did it help? Did it hurt? And for my OD practitioners who might be listening to this, what's your favorite aspect of our work? Let me know in the comments. And of course, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. And I will catch you in the next one. Bye, dreamers.